Hello there, digital world. Welcome back to yet another episode of Spliced In Later, where today we're doing a unique sort of episode in that it's really not going to be very long per se, but it hopefully will, at least to the listeners who listen, spark a conversation, whether it's within your own brain or with other people you know, about what truly is the greatest movie of all time. Now, books and general word of mouth would have you believe that is Citizen Kane, which will be today's main topic of today's discussion, however brief it is. But Rotten Tomatoes would have you quite rightly believe that it is Paddington 2. And then it really just depends on who you speak to and people's preferences. Some people think Seven Samurai is the greatest movie ever made. Some people think Gone with the Wind is the greatest movie ever made. And some people think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the greatest movie ever made. And in most instances, in my opinion, they're probably right. Because basically, to wrap up the episode before I even begin, the moral of this episode and to the point is that there is no definitive best movie of all time, because not everyone is going to have a unanimous agreement. A lot of people can agree on the same thing, but there is not a consensus clearly across the entire world that Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made or Paddington 2 is the greatest movie ever made, because the human race just doesn't work like that. If we did, there would be no wars. There would be no disagreements on global warming or who the president is being a dick to, or anything like that. We would all get along swimmingly, and we would basically be living in the future that is Star Trek: The Next Generation. So basically what this episode is pretty simply bringing Citizen Kane to people's attention so that they might watch it just to see for themselves if it is the greatest movie ever made. Because for most people, Citizen Kane is the thing they hear about and never seen. Unless you were in one of those lucky school classes that studied film and you were allowed to watch Citizen Kane, or it was one of the movies that was on option. I know back in the school days, films like To Kill a Mockingbird and Casablanca and a few other classic films were shown to, I don't know, it depends what class you were taking, whether it's to show the early days of cinema or a heavy concept. Like To Kill a Mockingbird is a very, very heavy concept of racism told through the eyes of a young girl. Maybe they're watching a movie as a companion piece to a book you're watching, which means you might even be lucky enough to watch Lord of the Rings in class. Speaking of which, now I think about it, I really need to talk about Lord of the Rings one day on this show. Anyway, moving on. But especially for me, for a lot of my early life, I never saw Citizen Kane, and I didn't really know that Citizen Kane existed. People would say, Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever, and I would go, I've never heard of it. I can't see it on my video shelf. No one I know is talking about it. It must be a super old movie, and we're not going to worry about it anymore. If you were young, and I would imagine that you were, growing up around the early or late 90s or whatever, you would probably know about Citizen Kane without ever having seen it, because it was just common thing. Nobody worried so much about avoiding spoilers. Certain films like A Sixth Sense, it's just ingrained into the personality that you know the twist that's in that movie, so people don't bother to try and avoid giving you that twist. On a side note, if you do not know the twist to The Sixth Sense, that's pretty cool. You should probably go watch that movie right now before your streak is ruined, essentially. But Citizen Kane, for me, when I was young, it was either my father who would say to me that Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever, but he also was saying it jestingly, in jocularity, because he would say Citizen Kane more like Citizen Lame or Citizen Bore, the most boringest movie ever made. He'd still say it's the greatest movie ever, but it is super boring. So, that's really going to entice a youngster to watch this movie. And then in pop culture, I mean, there's an episode of The Simpsons called Rosebud, which essentially just tells you what Citizen Kane is in a nice, brief 25-minute episode. Saves you the time of having to watch it for yourself if you don't feel like it. The only reason I have watched Citizen Kane is because of my later years where I have delved more into cinema as a history and as a concept and as an evolving franchise to a point. My early days of cinema was just the blockbusters, the big stuff in the cinemas, or the Disney films, or whatever I grew up on. That's the stuff I would watch, things based on books. It's only very recently that I have gone, people say these old black and white movies are okay. let's have a look at them. And now with an older perspective, I look at these with a new eyes and have an appreciation for what makes a film good. You cannot look at a film in the 1960s and knock it down because it doesn't look real, or the backgrounds look fake, or the acting's not as good as it is now. It's a different time with different production. If anything, you have to give it props because of what it is achieving, what it is trying to do, and what it eventually led to. These days, we're so used to spectacle just being a given. There was a time when if a movie used CGI, people would go, "Oh my god, that's incredible. That's blowing my mind watching that." These days now, people go to a movie expecting to see it, and they have a very high bar for what is acceptable, simple, natural viewing for movies. If a movie comes out with subpar CGI, it's immediately thrown into the dishwasher, and rightly so, because we're in a time where that's the standard. That's what you have to elevate yourself to. But you cannot take a movie like Avengers Infinity War with all that CGI and everything and then stack it up against 1978's Superman and go, well, that's Christopher Reeve on a wire. Why doesn't that look real? Infinity War looks much better. Of course it does. It irritates me just thinking about it. Anyway, what's the point? What's the moral of the story? I got lost track. Okay, so what the whole episode here is Citizen Kane the greatest movie? And my question to you will be, basically everybody has their own favorite best film. And I doubt that this episode is going to make you watch Citizen Kane and then immediately decide that. I have watched Citizen Kane, and I think it is a great film for the time period that it came out for. It is a testament to what it started in cinema. I've mentioned it here or there in other episodes, but we'll go into a bit here. It broke some barriers in terms of film technique for storytelling on cinema in a way that had not been done before. This was 1942, I believe, Citizen Kane came out. Though don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But again, it's your own personal opinion. I watched Citizen Kane. I think it's great. I watched a bunch of other black and white movies of that period, and I rank a lot of them higher than Citizen Kane, such as the previously mentioned Casablanca and Seven Samurai, but more specifically, 12 Angry Men, I think is an incredible film. Modern Times with Charlie Chaplin, Dr. Strangelove. These are some great films from the same period, which I absolutely put higher than Citizen Kane. So what is it about Citizen Kane that people think makes it the greatest movie ever made? I think you have to look at it as two distinct things here. The first being is the technical work that goes into Citizen Kane. Now, watching it now, you might think, what are you talking about? It's a shaky camera, black and white footage. The acting is subpar. People are blurring in and out of focus. This is nothing. But for 1942, the things they do in this film were revolutionary for the time. I mentioned it before, probably when I started this podcast over 2 years ago now. But I said there is a very iconic shot that completely highlights what makes Citizen Kane revolutionary, and it is one of the early scenes where young Charles Foster Kane is at his little cabin in the winterlands or the snow before he gets picked up by the rich man who takes him away to be his heir and to inherit his media empire, setting him on the path to become one of the most powerful and influential people in the world. In this beginning, though, he's poor, he's from humble beginnings, he lives with a family who can barely afford to feed him. So the scene is set, his mother and father are inside their cabin, and they are talking to the representative for the man who will adopt Charles Foster Kane. The camera continually switches shots, so it focuses outside the window to where young Kane is playing in the snow with his very important sled, frolicking away, not a care in the world, and then the camera will pan away from him, still keeping him framed, but blurring him out to then focus on the conversation that's going on in the cabin. Now, this was revolutionary for the time for Citizen Kane, the idea that a camera could do more than just be held, point in a direction, and then let the story play out. The fact that they went, we can do things with this camera, we can move it, we can zoom, we can focus in and out, we can use the camera to enhance the storytelling. That shot, the comparison of a young carefree Kane outside not knowing where his life is heading, and then inside where his fate and the rest of his life is essentially being decided for him, works so much better when it's the same camera and it's coming in and out of those two scenes to show the difference between the two, but how one is vastly impacting the other, than say just camera shot of the inside the cabin, cut to another camera outside, him playing in the snow. The same storytelling beats, but the impact to the viewer is much different. I don't know if I need to explain the point of Citizen Kane or the plot, because I think most people know, but you may not. I mean, I knew elements of Citizen Kane before I watched it. I didn't really know what the point was. So if you are curious, if I piqued your interest in a movie from 1942, basically Charles Foster Kane, Citizen Kane, tells a non-linear story. So it opens up, a media mogul, Charles Foster Kane, has passed away. He has died. He uttered a single word when he died, Rosebud. And then he carked it up in his little mansion, cut off from society. He lives like a man in a castle above all the commoner people. He's got a very fancy estate with animals wandering around and all this other stuff going on. Everybody marvels, oh my God, Charles Foster Kane is dead. All the newspapers report that he was the greatest man ever. He influenced the world 100 times over in terms of influencing the world, running for government, his paper dominating everyone else, the way he married other ladies and then cast friends aside when he needed to. 1 minute he could be compassionate and kind, and the next he was cruel. And one guy at a newspaper goes, okay, well, I hear that when he died he said Rosebud, and the maid said that. That must be important to him. Why would he say Rosebud? So he goes off on a little adventure. He goes around to all these people who knew Kane all through his life, and they talk about him, and you flash back between these talking heads to scenes from Kane's childhood, to him as a young adult, to him married, to him running his empire, to him getting old and frankly bonkers. But the whole time everyone's going, I don't know what you mean by Rosebud though. Rosebud, could it be his girlfriend? No, he never called her Rosebud. There's nothing in his paper to suggest that Rosebud was linked to anyone in his family, his friends. It's a mysterious thing. And this newspaper guy, in his quest to find out what Rosebud is, he also tries to understand who Kane was as a person. And the moral of the story here is that no one ever really knew him. He runs around all these people who say, oh yes, he was my best friend. Oh yes, he was my protege. But at the end of the day, no one really got what made him tick or understood him as a person, to a point where Rosebud, once you find out what Rosebud is, it is a very important part of his life and a defining point in his life. But no one knows because no one really cared. No one understood him enough to understand that. If you look at the research for this film is directed by Orson Welles and it stars Orson Welles. And Orson Welles was a unique individual. Some say they do not know where Charles Foster Kane began and Orson Welles ended, that they were very much just one and the same person. I know very little about Orson Welles as a person. I've read about him. I've not seen many movies that he has done, though I will try to rectify that in the future. I've seen what he became in terms of losing his marbles a bit. There is an infamous video on YouTube of him doing outtakes for selling some wine, and he's either drunk or he's not quite there, but it's equal parts hilarious and upsetting to see a man like that just suddenly be a shell of himself, and now years later it's used for laughs. But you also laugh because you can't help it. That's about it for Citizen Kane. I don't want to get more into it because if you have reached this point in your life and you do not know what Rosebud is, or you do not know what the story of Charles Foster Kane is, you are now welcome to go and watch it. I thought it would be really hard to find. It's not. I got it on DVD dirt cheap. I didn't think they'd even bother printing Citizen Kane on DVD, though I guess if it's the greatest movie ever made, it's going to be. I don't know if it's available on streaming, but it could be on YouTube for all I know. This movie is old but known, so it'll be out there somewhere. And if you are intrigued or piqued, or even hearing Rosebud has reminded you of the Simpsons episode that is basically Citizen Kane but Mr. Burns, now's your chance to go and watch it. My overall opinion of the film, I appreciate it for what it was. It's not going to have the same impact for me living in 2021 than it would for, say, somebody living in 1945 or 1953. Anyone who knew Orson Welles, who was aware of his career, anyone who was basically watching cinema evolve in front of their eyes would go and say, yes, Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made because the story that it is told, the way it tells its story and its non-linear narrative, cutting back and forth from past to present, using those camera techniques, using those different methods to tell a story, was unique and new and exciting. So naturally it's going to stick and resonate with people. But I do not think it is the greatest movie ever made anymore. But that is from a personal point of view. I can't tell you what I think my greatest movie ever made is. I know you're anxiously waiting for me to say that, because I just don't know. And that's because I watch too many movies and my mind's constantly thinking about what makes what good, and my brain will short circuit and haywire. I can't even make a top 100 movies of all time, because I try to, and then I have a list of about 500 films, and then to try and start cutting them down, I try to make I go, okay, let's take one film from this franchise. We've got all the Avengers films here, let's just pick one. But then how do you pick one? And then by limiting yourself in there, you then put other films on your list which you think, do you really like them better than one of the Avengers films you've cut out? Do I pick just one Lord of the Rings film? That's just ridiculous. What are we talking about here? So it's impossible for me to say. I have said in the past that 12 Angry Men was my favorite film of all time. And I stand by that to a degree. I think every time I do think about it, I understand why I said 12 Angry Men is my favorite film of all time. And it definitely deserves a high spot. But films are constantly coming out and I just keep reevaluating my position. If you want me to take a stance there, I'll say, sure, 12 Angry Men could be my most favorite film of all time. If that gets you to watch 12 Angry Men if you haven't seen it, if that gets more people to watch it, I'm all for it. But I also think that Paddington 2 is better than Citizen Kane, because Paddington 2 is a masterpiece of a film. And when I heard that on Rotten Tomatoes, it was suddenly the best rated film of all time, people, including a friend of mine, were like, what? Paddington 2? But if you've seen Paddington 2, you know that that's fair. That's accurate assumption, and it deserves to be up there. So, as I sign this off, okay, well, I should give you my final thoughts on Citizen Kane. What's my rating for it? Well, I give it an 8 out of 10. I highly appreciate it for what it was. I think it is an entertaining story, very well done from Orson Welles, and it is a very important part of film history. It doesn't have a lot of rewatchability factor unless you have a personal connection to it, but I absolutely appreciate it for what it is, and I understand and support anyone who does say that it is their favorite film of all time and the greatest film of all time. But again, as I said, there were a lot of older films that I would rate higher than that. I mean, films like Avengers Endgame, Mission Impossible, Fallout, 1917, The Green Knight, Blade Runner 2049. These are all films that have come out recently, which I think are tremendous and are definitely better than Citizen Kane. So it is each to their own opinion. So we'll sign off by saying to you, my listeners, what do you think is the greatest movie of all time? And before you jump to your decisions, have a proper think about it. Think if you only could take one film with you up into space when we go to Mars. You can only take one film. You are the person that has been told you can bring a film. No one else who's going to Mars can. It's just you. You get to bring a film, and you can only ever watch that film. Every other film you've ever seen, you can never see again. Which film do you pick? I hope such an extreme setting of an example or scenario there will really make you think, what is it? You won't just knee-jerk go, this one, as I sort of did with 12 Angry Men, but also not. So have a think about that, and if you want to let me know what you think is the greatest movie of all time, feel free to let me know somehow. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment. If you're listening on Spotify, send me a letter or fax. If you know me personally, send me a text message. I don't care. But for everybody listening, have a good think about it, because I think it warrants a good discussion, whether with people you know or in your brain. And maybe you listening do think that Citizen Kane is the greatest movie of all time. And if you do, fantastic. I support it 100%. Well, there you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed a very wishy-washy, but I think rather good episode. I think this one's been nice because it's just sort of been... I haven't planned... Well, to be fair, I don't plan anything out when I start these things. I just sit down and start talking and hope that what I say is coherent. But this has been more of a discussion with you as listeners and me as myself as well. Me as myself, me, myself, and I. It's definitely been a more carefree episode, which is nice every now and then. We don't have to be deadly serious about ranking and rating movies and saying why every movie is the greatest thing of all time. Sometimes it's fun just to go, what do you think? I don't know. Okay, cool. Moving on. Next week I will be back for, I don't know, either I'll be reviewing a movie, maybe, possibly, depending, or it might be time for another top 10. We'll see. But be sure to tune in for that exciting episode as it happens next week. Until then, I love and appreciate you all as always. Stay safe, stay kind to one another, and I will talk to you all very soon. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.